everyone, welcome to our third live Facebook live video. We've done a couple of these in the past with the Big Lottery Fund and Tina from the Community Foundation. Today we've got Noel Singh from Leicestershire County Council and we're going to be talking about the SHIRE grant. So Noel, what we asked was some of our local groups to send in their questions about the grant. I know a lot of them have applied before, but there's been a few changes. And I know you've got information on the website, but it's always great to hear from the funder directly. Yeah. So we'll just go straight in with the first question. How much funding is available through your grant scheme?
Okay, yeah, so this year we've got £350,000 available to administer in the form of community grants. Yeah. You can apply for small grants up to £3,000 or large grants up to £10,000. It is a slight reduction in terms of our grant allocation. Last year we had £420,000, so we've taken a budget cut of £70,000. Obviously the councils are having to make cuts across a range of services and we've had to take our share of the cuts. So it's a smaller grant pot, but we're confident that we will allocate all of that. We do tend to allocate the full grant allocation every year. We've got 4 rounds of funding. Given that we've got a smaller grant pot this year, I think it will be more competitive this year. So we're going to have to be even stricter about the projects that we can and can't fund this year.
Ooh, so what kind of projects are you looking for?
The criteria have largely stayed the same as they have in previous years. So we've tried to align the grant criteria very much alongside the strategic priorities of the council. Mm-hmm. The council is moving towards a position where we can't provide universal services for everyone anymore. We've got to think about how we can support those most in need. So we've improved the grant criteria and we've adapted it over the years and tightened it, focused it down. So we're very much around supporting the most vulnerable and disadvantaged people in communities. So essentially what we're looking to fund are projects that provide some sort of early intervention and prevention solution in local communities for the most vulnerable and disadvantaged people. And that can be people across a range of different types of vulnerability, from older people, people with disabilities, people with mental health issues. It could be young people from disadvantaged areas. It could be young people who, for example, are not in education, employment or training, or involved in antisocial behaviour. It could be carers, people with caring responsibilities, people who've been victims of crime or abuse, anyone who we could categorise as having experienced a form of vulnerability or disadvantage. And there's a clear list in our guidance notes of the types of vulnerability that we're seeking to support in terms of improving the lives and outcomes for those people.
Okay, so really you're looking for projects which demonstrate that they understand the needs of the people that they're working with and that the people that they're supporting have very clear sort of vulnerabilities, if you like.
Absolutely, yeah. And the other thing probably to mention, just going back to the council's priorities, we've got to look at ways of reducing demand on the council and also other public services like the health service and police and various others. So we're really looking at projects that provide that early intervention to support people in their local communities so their situations don't get any worse. We're essentially looking at projects that improve the life chances and opportunities of vulnerable people, so preventing that need for more costly council services further down the line. So if I give you an example, we know that there's an issue around social isolation and loneliness, particularly with older people. So it may be a project that provides a day service, or it could be a befriending service that goes into older people's homes and provides that social support for them. Those sort of projects will have proven to improve the well-being of individuals, and that helps to keep them independent and ultimately prevent the need for services such as residential care or other domiciliary care services. So they're the sort of projects that we really want to fund.
That makes sense. So I know at the Borough Council we're always encouraging groups to look for other sources of funding and not to come to us year on year for the same project.
Yeah.
Is that the same at the county? Is that what you encourage groups to do?
Yeah, it's a key aspect of our grants is that we're generally only looking to fund new projects. There's a number of reasons for that. One reason is the council has had to disinvest from a number of services across the board over the last few years, and that unfortunately does include some voluntary groups. So if the council has taken a strategic decision to disinvest from a particular project or activity, it wouldn't be appropriate for that group to then apply to the SHIRE grants to fund that project because the council's already disinvested, and it wouldn't be right for one area of the council to be saying sorry, we're not funding this anymore, and then for another area of the council to then
fill that gap.
so we've got to be clear that we're being consistent as a council.
Yeah.
So that's the first reason. The other thing is, I think we have found in the past that a lot of voluntary groups are reliant on grant funding, and particularly year-on-year grant funding to keep a project going. I think we've got to be careful that we don't create the situation where voluntary groups become reliant on the same funding year on year. And also, we want groups to be creative and innovative. We want to encourage creativity. We want people to identify what the needs are, whether that's in their local community or whether that's with their cohort of participants, or it might be a different group of participants. Although we don't necessarily fund new projects, we can fund up to £1,000 maximum for a continuation of existing projects, so it's only a small amount. But we can also consider funding the expansion of an existing project. So, for example, if you've got a project that's operating in Loughborough and it's working with a particular client group, but they've identified a need for a similar client group in another part of Charnwood, and they want to expand that project and they want some funding to recruit more staff to deliver that project in another area of Charnwood to a wider range of beneficiaries, that's something we can certainly consider.
Oh, brilliant. But I suppose in those situations you'd want groups to contact you and have a conversation around that first. Yeah,
absolutely. Again, we do like groups to contact us. There's nothing worse than receiving what we call a cold application. We like to have a conversation with applicants, so we do advise all applicants to give us a call or drop us an email first, and we'll have a conversation with you and advise you whether we think your project is likely to be eligible for funding or not. We don't want people to waste time putting an application in if it's not going to be eligible for funding.
No, fair enough. So you obviously cover a large patch with your grant funding. Is it equally sort of distributed? Do you have sort of set amounts for each borough or district?
It's not distributed in that way. We don't have a set amount for each borough. It's kind of demand led. It's very much what project comes in, and whichever ones are applicable for funding we will fund. It's an interesting split. Charnwood does fairly well, actually.
Yay!
Last year we funded 105 projects, and of those it was 23 projects in Charnwood that we approved funding for. It was second in place to North West Leicestershire, so we funded...
We've got to beat that then.
Yeah, so you've got some competition there. So in North West Leicestershire we funded 30 projects, but Charnwood was second in terms of the districts. We also fund projects that operate county-wide, and there's certain projects that also will support people across a number of districts and boroughs as well. But Charnwood's a really active place, as you well know. It's a really fertile landscape for the voluntary and community sector, so we do get a lot of interest and a lot of applications from Charnwood, so keep the applications coming.
That's always good news. So you said you've got about over 100 applications that come through. Typically, how many applications are you rejecting each round?
Yeah, that's a good question. So yeah, we approved 105 last year. We probably approve roughly 20 to 25 applications in each round, and we have 4 rounds of funding. And we reject, again, around 10 to 20 each round. I guess the important thing to say is we screen the applications. So myself and Andy Hayes, the other grants officer, we have a look at the applications first and we screen them. And if they don't meet the eligibility criteria, we kind of reject them outright. So they won't even be progressed forward for a decision if they don't meet the eligibility criteria. It's rare for an application to be progressed for a decision and then be rejected at that point. We tend to screen out ones that don't meet the criteria quite early on, and that can be for a variety of reasons. It tends to be generally not meeting the eligibility criteria, not focusing on vulnerable or disadvantaged people, or not demonstrating what outcomes and benefits it's going to achieve for vulnerable people.
So those are the sort of key reasons why applications are being rejected?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. So you mentioned outcomes. You know, you've changed your approach slightly over the past few years to become more outcomes focused, and we know that a lot of other funders are doing that as well. What does that mean for groups that are applying for your funding? How do they approach this whole outcomes focused way of working?
Yeah, again, a really good point. And we talk about outcomes a lot, and maybe it's sort of council speak, a bit jargonistic. I think it's important that we explain outcomes in a way that's understandable to people. It's essentially it's the difference that your project is making and the impacts and benefits that you're having for local people. It's really important that voluntary and community sector groups become more skilled at demonstrating the difference that they're making. They're very good at getting the funding in and telling us what they're going to do with the money, but not necessarily as good at telling us the difference that they've made. And this is something that we've identified over the last few years. So recently we have adapted the application form, and we've got some very clear questions there that specifically asked what impacts and benefits your project's going to have for its beneficiaries, how many people it's going to support, how you're going to identify and target and recruit the participants for your project, and also how you're going to record and report the outcomes at the end of the project, because that's something that's really important to us. We need to know that the project's making a difference and that the money that we've invested that has actually proved vital for those individuals.
Okay, so what kind of information are you expecting from an organisation that's been given a grant, they've completed their project, and sort of like end of year project report? What are you expecting from them?
Well, firstly, we need to show, we need to be clear that they've spent the money in the correct way. So we look for evidence of expenditure, and that can be receipts, invoices, copies of orders, those sort of things. But some qualitative as well as quantitative information around the outcomes that they've achieved. So what difference they've made. Some lessons learned is always really useful in terms of what's worked well with the project, what perhaps hasn't worked as well as intended or expected, and how they would perhaps do things differently in the future. Case studies are always really good as well. I appreciate that with grants, and particularly for smaller grants, a lot of the time it tends to be the anecdotal sort of stories around the impact that these projects and the funding has had on individuals' lives. And we will from time to time go out and visit projects and collate case studies. We've posted quite a few on our website, and that's always a really good way of sort of sharing that story. But ultimately it's just about organisations from the outset having a clear idea about what they're going to achieve, and I think it's really important for groups to think about that from the beginning of their project, which is why we've got those questions in the application form now.
Cool. So I'm just going to go back to one of the points that you mentioned, where organisations, you know, they need to be honest in their end of year report. If things didn't go well or things need changing, you want to see it there as a lesson learned. But from a group's point of view, that sort of criticism might be a little bit, they're not going to fund us if they know that we didn't actually hit all our targets. Any advice that you can give around that specific issue, I guess?
I would say that honesty is the best policy.
Yeah, keep it simple.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really important that groups are honest with themselves, because we can't always do everything. We can't be all things to all men and all women. And it's about learning. And I think if you're delivering a project, whether it's a grant-funded project or a project at the council, you've got to be honest about what's worked and what hasn't, and you can only improve your activities or the impact you have on the people you work with if you're constantly learning. So I think having that sort of critical perspective and looking at what's worked well and what hasn't is really, really important, and that can only benefit the organisation long term. Yeah,
and I suppose from a funder point of view, it shows it's credible organisation that's effectively monitoring their work and evaluating it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay, so you've got an application process. It's all done online. Is it sort of you log in and you can save as you go along, or is it something that you've got to complete in one sitting? How does it work?
We're not quite as technical as that, or technically advanced as that, I'm afraid. What we do have, you're right, it's an online application form, and unfortunately at this point in time you do have to complete it all in one sitting. But to sort of deal with that issue, we've got a downloadable Word version of the application, so you can download that version and you can work on your application in your own time. You can share it with other people in your organisation or your trustees and ensure you've got all the information you need before you then submit the final application online. What we'll also say is we're quite happy for people to send us a draft of the Word version, and we can offer some feedback and some comments before they send their final version. We're quite happy to do that, because what we don't want is a situation where we get an application in and there's lots of issues and we're having to constantly go back and forth for clarification. So where we have the capacity, we will advise groups to send in a draft of their application. We'll offer some comments and some feedback, and they can take that all on board before they submit their final version.
Oh, brilliant. And do you have word limits on any of your questions?
We do.
Okay.
People don't always tend to stick to them, if I'm honest with you. But I think that's a really key point. It's about answering the question that's being asked and answering it clearly and concisely. There is a tendency sometimes to go off on a tangent, and I think it's really important just to answer the question that's being asked.
Okay, cool. So you mentioned that an application submitted, you and Andy do the initial screening. What happens next?
Okay, so for all applications we receive, we do some initial screening. We'll just do an initial check that the application meets the main grant criteria. If there's any initial questions or points of clarification, we will go back to the applicant and ask them to clarify those points. And if we're satisfied that the application has a potential of being funded, that it generally meets most of our criteria, the next thing we do, we actually share the application with other officers in the council. So we actually obtain expert feedback. So for example, if it's a project that works with people with mental health issues, we'll speak to colleagues in either public health or in adult services or children's services. If it's a children's project, we'll get their expert feedback on the project. And what we're really seeking from that feedback is to ensure that the project aligns with the strategic priorities of that particular department and that it complements other services that are being delivered. We've got to be careful that we're not duplicating services that are already being commissioned or already being delivered. So what we're seeking in terms of expert feedback is just that clarification that the project is aligned to what the council and its departments are trying to achieve. So that's a really important part of the process. Although myself and Andy do the majority of the administration, we don't have a final say on the applications. It's really about us pooling all the information to allow the final decision makers to make an informed decision on the application. So the other thing to mention is if you're applying for a large grant of up to £10,000, so more than 3,000, we also ask for the endorsement or support from the relevant lead elected member.
Okay.
So again, if your project is an adult social care project working with, say, older people or adults with disabilities, we'll approach the cabinet lead member for adult social care and ask for their opinion on the application.
Okay.
But the final decision for large grant applications are made by our lead member for communities, and the final decision for small grant applications are made by our head of service for communities, policy and resilience.
Yeah, yeah. And I know in the past you've sort of sent us some information about potential grantees, just to find out what's happening locally. So it's true what they say, funders talk to each other. Yeah, keep it honest.
That's right, yeah, and it is important. We don't only speak to colleagues internally, we do speak to colleagues like yourself. So if it's a project in Loughborough that we know you'll be familiar with, we'll get your sort of opinion on it as well. Yeah. So again, it's like you said earlier, it's about being credible. We need to know that you're credible as an organisation. And one of the questions that we actually ask is, why are you best placed to deliver this project? Because
that tricky question.
Yeah, definitely. I think, there is again a tendency where you've got a number of organisations potentially in the same geographical area working with a similar cohort of participants, and we need to know what sets you apart from the rest, because otherwise we could be in a situation where we're funding 5 projects in Loughborough, all working with homeless people. So we need to know that we're not duplicating provision and that we are funding the right projects. Yeah,
so you've got your checks and balances in place. Okay, so what help and support is available for community groups? You've mentioned that they can always send you information and have a chat with you, but anywhere else that you'd recommend that they'd go?
Yeah, so initially, absolutely, we encourage organisations to contact us, discuss their project with us, happy for them to send a draft in, but also to get advice and support from other organisations. We have a contract with Voluntary Action Leicestershire, so they can provide support to potential applicants, and also any other support that applicants can get from other organisations or individuals like yourself, for example, with the support you provide to groups in Charnwood. Also the district council, other district councils around the county have neighbourhood and community support teams. They can always get their applications or their ideas checked by those individuals. But we're quite happy for people to ring us, email us and discuss their project proposal with us. We'd rather they contacted us than didn't contact us.
Yeah, no, that makes sense, because you get a feel for it. And I suppose you just want to make sure that they have the best chance when they submit their application. I suppose those are sort of like the key questions. I guess we'll just end with the funders' top 3 tips.
Right, okay.
What are your top 3 tips for anyone looking to apply for a SHIRE grant?
Right, okay, first and foremost, read the guidance notes.
Okay.
And that's a really obvious but a really important one.
Yeah.
We still get a lot of inquiries or applications from people who haven't read the basic criteria.
Right.
So a classic example would be in an organisation like a village hall in a community in Leicestershire who simply want to upgrade the building. That's not the sort of thing that we're looking to fund. Right. We're looking to fund the direct delivery of projects that improve the lives of vulnerable people. If, however, your village hall wants to deliver a new service for a new user group, it could be that there's a rising number of older people in the area and you want to now deliver a service for older people. If you need to make adaptations to your building or create a new kitchen facility to serve the needs of those people, then we will consider funding that sort of improvement to the building, but it's got to be based on improving the lives of disadvantaged people, so that's a key point. But yeah, you've got to read the guidance notes. We've got lots of kind of summarised guidance on the application information and on the website. So it's really important that people have a look at that before they get in touch with us. The second point, I think I sort of alluded to this earlier, and that's answer the question being asked. Try not to waffle or go off on tangents. I think the questions we ask are very clear. There's quite a lot of questions, but hopefully there's enough there to guide you to ensure that you're giving us all the information we need. So try to answer the question that's being asked and not go off on tangents. And the final point, it probably goes back to what we discussed about outcomes. Make sure that you're describing clearly the difference that your project's going to make in terms of the impacts and benefits it's going to have on the lives of people the project's going to support.
Brilliant. Okay, so that's sort of straightforward stuff. You know, people assume that that's like, yeah, we're doing that anyway. But there you go, top 3 tips from Noel if you're looking to apply. Make sure you get in touch with them and have a conversation. I think that's probably the best way to start and get a feel for how likely it is that your project will be successful with getting some funding. That's all my questions. Is there anything else you want to add to or tell anyone who's watching this video live or maybe later? Yeah,
sure. So the information about the grants programme is all on our website. That's www.leicestershirecommunities.org.uk/grants.
Hope you will get that link in our comments.
Hopefully. Yeah. There are 4 application deadlines, the first of which is on Monday the 14th of May, I believe, and then there's 3 more deadlines throughout the year. So all that information's on the website. So any information you need, have a look on the website. If you've got any queries, give us a call or drop us a line. Our email address, shiregrants@leics.gov.uk.
Look at that. Brilliant. Lovely. Thank you very much, and thank you all who've been watching.